The first time I saw the door, it was already half uncovered. St. Bartholomew Medical Center sat on the edge of Thunder Bay, a brick and concrete sprawl built in pieces across nearly 70 years. Nothing about it was beautiful. The oldest wing had narrow service corridors with sweating pipes overhead and paint that never looked fully dry, no matter how many times facilities rolled a new coat over the last one. The newer wings were all polished floors, glass, and donor plaques. But under all of it, under the additions and remodels and code updates, there was still the old hospital. Everyone who worked nights knew that. I was a maintenance electrician then, 34 years old, divorced, and 6 months behind on the truck I couldn't afford to lose. Night shift paid more, so I took nights. Most of the work was routine: failed ballasts, bad outlets, flickering hallway lights, a nurse call panel throwing false alarms. Quiet jobs, mostly. The kind you could do half awake with a coffee cooling on top of your tool cart. That week we were assigned to a basement renovation beneath the original surgical wing. They were turning old storage and disused mechanical rooms into records overflow because administration had finally admitted the off-site archive was a mess. My partner, Leon Mercer, was a plumber who'd worked there long enough to remember when people still smoked in the break room. He was from Duluth, broad-shouldered, always smelled faintly of pipe dope and peppermint gum, and had a habit of talking to walls while he worked, like they might answer if he stayed patient enough. "Something's off with this layout," he said around 11 that night, standing with a flashlight tucked under one arm. We were behind a temporary dust barrier near the old laundry tunnel, where a demolition crew had opened part of a cinder block partition earlier that day. The floor was layered in grit. The air had that cold mineral smell basements get when fresh plaster and ancient concrete mix together. Beyond the plastic sheeting, the rest of the hospital carried on in muffled sounds: an overhead page, a rolling cart, somebody laughing too loudly at the nurse's station. Leon aimed his light through the opening in the broken wall. At first, I thought I was looking at another service alcove. Then I saw the frame. It was a steel door set into poured concrete, about 4 feet wide, painted the same institutional beige as everything else in the old wing, but the paint had aged differently. It had gone dull and chalky, and the edges were feathered with rust. There was no handle on the outside. Just a welded plate where one should have been, and a heavy sliding hasp fitted across it. Not new. Not old enough to be original, either. Added later. There was also no label. In a hospital, that was strange enough to stop both of us. Every room had a label. Storage. Biohazard hold. Medical gas. Electrical. Records. Linen. Even abandoned rooms usually had a ghost of one, adhesive residue, or drilled holes where a sign used to be. This door had nothing at all. No room number. No warning placard. No faded stencil. Just blank paint and the hasp. Leon spat his gum wrapper into a trash bin and squinted at it. "That ain't on the plans." I had the folded drawings in my back pocket. I opened them on a crate and checked by flashlight. The wall we were looking at was supposed to back onto an old service chase that had been filled and capped in the 90s. "Nope," I said. "Not there." He gave me a look. "You want to tell me how a steel door ends up in a wall where there's supposed to be solid concrete? Same way anything ends up in this place. Somebody buried a problem instead of fixing it." That got a grin out of him, but only for a second. We called our supervisor, Rick Doherty, who came down irritated because he'd been upstairs dealing with a busted ice machine in oncology. Rick was one of those men who sweated anger. Red face, little eyes, every sentence sounding like the end of an argument. He shoved past the plastic and shined his own light at the door. "The hell is this?" "Found it behind the partition," I said. "It's not on the print set," Leon added. Rick took the plans, studied them for maybe 10 seconds, then swore under his breath. "Probably an old infectious storage room. Asbestos, maybe? God knows." He walked closer, crouched, and ran a finger through the dust in front of the threshold. There weren't any footprints. That was the first detail I remember clearly now, because later I kept coming back to it. The floor everywhere else had marks from work boots, drag lines from removed studs, wheel tracks from a lift cart. But directly in front of that door, the dust lay flat and unbroken, except for one clean crescent where the demolition crew's blade must have scraped near the frame. Rick straightened. "Nobody opens it. We call admin in the morning, get records to dig up old drawings, maybe infection control if we have to. We don't touch unknown sealed spaces in a hospital basement at midnight. Understood?" "Fine by me," Leon said. Rick looked at me. "Kill the temporary power and wrap it for the night. I don't want anyone wandering back here." We nodded. He left. Leon went to shut off a water line feeding an abandoned sink bank, and I started coiling extension cords. That should have been the end of it. But when you spend enough years in old buildings, you develop a sense for spaces. Some rooms feel dead the second you open them, just stale air and junk. Some feel active. Not haunted. Not cursed. Just wrong in a way your body notices before your head does, a pressure change, a temperature shift, a smell with no clear source. Standing there alone, I kept looking at the welded-over latch plate on that door. It wasn't just sealed. It had been sealed by someone who expected the seal to matter. Leon came back carrying his toolbox. "You good?" "Yeah." He followed my eyes to the door. "You know what this reminds me of?" "No." "County Infirmary in Duluth. They had an old psych-hold room in the basement they used for file storage in the 70s. Cinderblock walls, drain in the middle, no windows. Nobody liked going in there alone. This doesn't look like a psych room." "No." He stared a second longer. "Looks worse." We both laughed a little at that, because that's what men do when a place gets under their skin. Then we zipped the dust barriers shut and headed up to the shop. At 2:13 a.m., the emergency panel for the old surgical wing lost power for 8 seconds. Not enough to hurt anything serious. Backup caught it. But that panel hadn't tripped in years, and it was my circuit, so I had to go check it. Leon was on another call, unclogging a staff washroom on 4 West. I took my cart and went alone. The basement corridor was quieter than before. Night staff had settled into that strange hospital silence where everything important happens behind closed doors and the hallways feel paused, as if the building itself is listening. The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere far off, a machine alarm chirped and then stopped. I unlocked the electrical room, checked the breakers, and found nothing obvious. No heat, no smell, no fault indicator. I was writing down the time of the trip when I heard metal strike concrete. One sharp sound. From behind the dust barrier. I froze, pen still on the clipboard. A second sound followed. Not loud. More like something inside a room had been dropped and had rolled once before stopping. I set the clipboard down and listened. Nothing. It would have been easy, smart, even, to walk away and call security. But maintenance people are paid to investigate noises. Half the job is proving that every strange sound has a dumb explanation. A settling duct. A loose chain. A mouse in a ceiling cavity. I told myself that as I crossed the corridor and unzipped the plastic. The work lights inside were off. My flashlight beam shook dust out of the air and threw long shadows across the broken partition. The hidden door stood exactly where we left it. But the hasp was hanging open. For a second my brain refused to make sense of what I was seeing. I remember staring at it stupidly, waiting for the image to correct itself. The padlock was still threaded through the staple. Only it wasn't locked anymore. It was resting open against the steel plate, as if someone had used a key, removed the shackle, and then changed their mind halfway through leaving. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear breathing. I just felt, very suddenly and very clearly, that I was not alone on that side of the plastic. Then, from the other side of the sealed door, something hit at once from within. Hard enough to make the metal ring. I stumbled backwards so fast I clipped my tool cart with my heel and nearly went down. The sound wasn't subtle. It was a real, physical blow from the other side of that steel. Not pipes knocking. Not concrete shifting. Not some loose piece of demo debris sliding into the frame. It was a hit. A fist, maybe? Or a shoulder. Something with weight behind it. Then came silence so complete it seemed staged. I stood there with my flashlight aimed at the door, waiting for another strike. Nothing. My first coherent thought was that somebody had gotten trapped in there. Maybe a demo worker earlier in the day. Maybe security had opened it and not told anyone. Maybe there was a homeless person in some forgotten service space. Hospitals in northern cities got all kinds once winter set in. People looking for warmth, a stairwell, a place no one checked often. Every explanation that made sense lasted about 2 seconds, then ran into the same problem. That room was supposed to be sealed inside solid concrete. And the dust in front of it had been untouched. I backed out through the plastic, grabbed the wall phone just outside the electrical room, and called security. The guard on nights was a guy named Dean Forrester, ex-corrections, built like a retired linebacker, with a voice so calm it made everyone else sound dramatic. I told him I was in the old basement renovation and that someone might be behind a locked door. "Someone you saw?" he asked. "Someone I heard." A pause. "You in immediate danger?" I looked at the zipped plastic, the silent corridor, the light reflecting off my own cart. "I don't know." He must have heard something in my voice because he said, "Stay where you are. I'm coming down." It took him maybe 4 minutes. Long enough for me to replay the sound in my head until I started doubting it. By the time Dean rounded the corner with his flashlight and radio, part of me was embarrassed. He listened without interrupting, then asked to see the door. We went back in together. The padlock was still open on the hasp. Dean crouched low, studying it, then looked at the dust. "You touched this?" "No." He took out a pair of gloves, lifted the padlock, and turned it in the beam. "No fresh damage. No pry marks." He held it closer. "This was unlocked with a key. Could Rick have done that? Then why leave it hanging?" "Good question." Dean stood and pressed his ear lightly to the door. We waited. I don't know what I expected. Breathing, maybe? Movement. Another impact. But all I could hear was the building itself, far away air handlers, the tick of cooling pipes, the thin electrical buzz old fluorescents make when they've been on too long. Dean stepped back and tried the welded plate where the handle used to be. Nothing. The door didn't move. Help me with the hasp, he said. Should we? If there's a person in there, yes. He removed the padlock fully and set it on the floor. Together we slid the hasp free. The steel scraped loudly enough to make me flinch. Then Dean put both hands against the door and pushed. It didn't budge. He leaned harder. Still nothing. Opens inward, Leon said behind us. Both of us turned so fast Dean's hand went to his radio. Leon stood just outside the opening in the partition with his toolbox and a coffee cup, looking more annoyed than startled. Jesus Christ, Dean snapped. Make some noise when you walk up. Leon shrugged. I did. You two were having a moment. What are you doing here? I asked. Finished upstairs, came back for my line camera. He nodded at the door. Thought we weren't touching it. Dean gave him the short version. Leon's expression changed as soon as I mentioned the hit from inside. You heard it for sure? I heard it. Leon set the coffee down. Let me see. He stepped forward, squinted at the hinges, then the threshold. If it opens inward, and if the room's shifted, it could be binding at the bottom. He planted a boot against the frame and pulled at the edge with both hands where the steel had enough seam for fingertips. At first, nothing happened. Then the door moved maybe half an inch with a sticky groan and stopped. A smell came out. Not rot. Not chemicals. Older than that. Dry, stale air trapped for years, mixed with something hospital clean buried under dust. Like linen and antiseptic sealed in a trunk. There was also another note I couldn't place then, something faintly sweet and wrong, the kind of smell you notice more after you leave it. Dean covered his nose. All right. That's enough. But Leon, stubborn as always, put his shoulder into it and dragged the door another 3 inches open. My flashlight found the room first. It was small. Maybe 12 by 16 feet. Concrete walls. No windows. No obvious ventilation. Shelving along the far wall, most of it rusted. A sink on the left with no faucet handles. Floor drain in the center. A single overhead fixture with a wire cage around it. And near the back, shoved partly under one of the shelves, an old hospital gurney with cracked black padding. No person. No movement. Just dust and old equipment, and a room that looked like it had been abandoned all at once. Dean let out a breath. Nobody's in there. He sounded relieved, but not fully convinced. Leon opened the door wide enough for us to step inside. The dust on the floor was thick, but not untouched. I saw that right away. Not footprints exactly. More like drag marks. Long, faint disturbances leading from the door toward the back wall, then crossing each other like someone had moved heavy things years ago and never cleaned after. My light passed over metal trays, a dented floor stand, cardboard cartons gone soft at the corners, and glass jars clouded with grime. Most had no labels left. One shelf held stacks of ring binders swollen from damp, their covers fused together. Another had folded privacy screens and a box of rubber tubing hardened into loops. This isn't storage, Leon said quietly. What is it? I asked. Dean moved toward the sink, checking corners the way trained people do when they don't trust an empty room. Used to be something clinical. He was right. Even trashed and stripped, the room carried that feeling. Not like records or supplies. Like procedures. Something done repeatedly, then stopped. My flashlight landed on the wall beside the sink. There were outlines where objects had once hung, rectangles cleaner than the concrete around them. One large, 3 smaller beneath it. And above those, a faint square of discoloration at eye level, about the size of an old wall clock. No objects remained. Just their shadows. Leon had moved to the gurney. Hey! He was looking underneath it. I crouched beside him and saw a metal clipboard lying face down in the dust. Leon lifted it carefully. The paper clipped under the rusted spring had yellowed to the color of old teeth, but it was still mostly intact. At the top was the hospital's old name, St. Bartholomew Charitable Infirmary, printed underneath in faded block letters. Lower Isolation Unit, Room B. The form below that was too smeared to read well, except for fragments. Patient transferred from. Observation at intervals not exceeding. Door to remain secured. And then, in darker ink, written by hand across the bottom. Do not reopen without superintendent authorization. Dean took the clipboard from Leon. All right. Everybody out. Why? Leon asked. Because now this is administrative, and I'm not standing in an undocumented room full of unknown old medical crap with 2 maintenance guys at 2:30 in the morning. Reasonable enough. None of us argued. We were turning to leave when my flashlight crossed the inside face of the door. There were scratches on it. Not random marks. Not corrosion. Parallel grooves, clustered around shoulder height, then lower near the welded plate. Some were short and choppy, others long enough to show a repeated motion. The steel had been scored down to bare metal in places. Leon saw them at the same time I did. You seeing that? Dean stepped closer. His jaw tightened. The marks were on the inside. Before anyone said anything, a voice came from the corridor beyond the dust barrier. Dean? You down there? We all startled again. This time it was only a nurse, Allison Kemp from ICU, still in blue scrubs, one hand on the plastic flap. Her face looked pale in the fluorescent spill from the hall. Sorry, she said. I saw your cart and thought. Then she noticed the open room and went silent. Dean frowned. This area's closed. Allison didn't answer. She was staring into the room past us, not at the shelves or the gurney. At the back wall. What? I said. She swallowed. I know that room. That landed hard enough to change the air. Dean straightened. From when? Allison looked like she regretted speaking at all. She was in her late 50s, one of those nurses who had seen enough in her career that very little rattled her on the surface. Code blues, trauma admits, family breakdowns in hallways, she could handle all of it. But whatever she was seeing now had taken the color out of her face. My grandmother worked here, she said quietly. Housekeeping, then ward aide. She used to talk about a locked room under the old surgery wing. She called it the quiet ward. Leon gave a small snort. That's a cheerful name. Allison ignored him. She said patients were kept there when the hospital didn't know what else to do with them. Not insane. Not contagious, exactly. Just. She hesitated, searching for a word she didn't like. Disturbed after surgery. After accidents. People who woke up wrong. People who said things. Dean's expression hardened. That's folklore. Maybe. Allison kept looking into the room. She also said no one on nights would go down there alone after 1959. Why 1959? I asked. Allison met my eyes then, and what scared me wasn't that she looked frightened. It was that she looked certain. Because that was the year they sealed the door, she said. After the patient inside it died 3 days before anybody admitted he was still there. No one spoke for a few seconds after Allison said that. Hospitals have a way of absorbing stories. Most of them get exaggerated, bent over time, or outright invented. Staff pass them around during slow nights or over burnt coffee, half joking, half serious. I'd heard dozens since starting there, about bodies mislabeled in the morgue, about elevators opening on floors that didn't exist, about a nurse who supposedly kept working 3 days after she died. This didn't feel like one of those. Dean recovered first. Allison, you shouldn't be back here. I know, she said, but didn't move. I didn't think it was real. Leon shifted his weight. You're saying they locked someone in here and forgot? That's what she said. Allison glanced again at the scratch door, then at the gurney. She never told it like a ghost story. More like something people didn't talk about anymore. Dean looked between the three of us, then back into the room. He exhaled slowly through his nose, like he was filing the whole situation into something manageable. Okay. We're done here for tonight. I'm logging this as an unsecured restricted area. I'll call Rick and admin in the morning. Until then, nobody comes back here alone. He looked directly at me when he said that. I nodded. Leon grabbed his toolbox. Works for me. We stepped out, and Dean pulled the door shut as far as it would go. It stuck again near the end, leaving a gap of maybe an inch. He didn't try to force it closed the rest of the way. Instead, he slid the hasp back across and reattached the padlock, snapping it shut. The sound of that click was louder than it should have been. Allison lingered a second longer, then followed us out. Dean zipped the plastic barrier closed behind us and taped the seam. Go back to your floor, he told her. She hesitated. You're going to keep it locked, right? Yes. She gave a small nod, but her eyes drifted back toward the partition one last time before she left. Leon and I walked back toward the shop together. Neither of us said much at first. The corridor felt narrower than before, like the walls had crept in a few inches while we weren't looking. People who woke up wrong, Leon muttered finally. That's a hell of a phrase. People say all kinds of things, I said. You believe her? I believe she believes it. He scratched at his beard. Those marks on the door didn't look like a story. No, they didn't. We split off near the elevators. Leon headed up to finish paperwork. I went back to the electrical room to finish logging the panel trip. I tried to focus on routine. Times. Circuits. Possible causes. But my mind kept drifting back to the room. The clipboard. The scratches. And the sound. I kept replaying that impact in my head, trying to break it down into something mechanical. A pipe hammering against a bracket. A loose panel slamming. Something explainable. It didn't fit. At 3:02 a.m., the emergency panel tripped again. This time for longer. The lights in the corridor dimmed noticeably before the backup kicked in. Somewhere upstairs, I heard a burst of overlapping alarms, short, sharp, then silenced as systems reset. I swore under my breath, grabbed my flashlight, and went to check it again. The air felt colder. That's the first thing I noticed stepping out of the electrical room. Not freezing, just dropped a few degrees. Enough that I could feel it on my face. I walked faster. The dust barrier was still sealed. The tape unbroken. Good. I turned back to the panel room, opened the door, and heard something behind me. Not a bang this time. A slow scrape. Like metal shifting against concrete. I turned. The plastic barrier bulged inward slightly, then settled. I stared at it, waiting. Another scrape came, softer, longer. Followed by a faint, irregular tapping. Not rhythmic. Not mechanical. It sounded tentative. Like someone testing a surface. My mouth went dry. Dean? I called out, louder than I meant to. No answer. The tapping stopped. I stood there for a full minute, listening. Nothing. I told myself it was pressure. Air movement from the ventilation system kicking on after the panel reset. The plastic shifting. Debris settling inside the room now that we disturbed it. All reasonable. I walked over and pressed a hand lightly against the barrier. Still. I peeled back a corner of the tape. The instant the seal broke, the smell hit me again. Stronger this time. That same dry, stale air, but now with something else mixed in. Dampness. Not water. Something organic, faint but unmistakable. I hesitated. Then I pulled the zipper down a foot. My flashlight cut into the dark. The work lights we'd left off were still off. The room beyond the broken partition was black except for my beam. The door. Closed. Hasp in place. Padlock locked. Exactly as we'd left it. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. See? I muttered to myself. Nothing. I zipped the barrier back up and pressed the tape into place again. As I turned away, something moved behind the plastic. I saw it out of the corner of my eye. A shift in the shadows. Not fast. Not dramatic. Just enough to make my brain register motion. I froze. Slowly I turned back. The plastic hung still. The room beyond looked exactly the same. But the door. The gap we'd left? That inch where it hadn't fully closed. It was gone. The door sat flush in the frame now. Sealed tight. I stepped closer, heart beating hard enough I could feel it in my throat. Okay, I whispered. No. I stared at the padlock. It was still there. Still locked. But the hasp had shifted slightly. Not open. Just not sitting exactly the way Dean had left it. Like it had been moved and put back. I don't remember deciding to unzip the barrier again. 1 second I was standing there, the next I was inside, moving toward the door. The air felt heavier. My flashlight beam shook across the steel surface. The scratches on the inside weren't visible now, of course. Just the blank exterior. The welded plate. The padlock. I reached out and touched the metal. Cold. Too cold for a room that had been sealed for decades. And then, a sound. Not from the door. From behind me. I turned so fast my shoulder hit the frame. The room looked empty. Shelves. Sink. Gurney. But the clipboard. It wasn't under the gurney anymore. It lay in the center of the floor. Face up. I hadn't heard it move. I hadn't seen anything shift. It was just there. I took one step toward it. Then another. Every instinct I had told me to leave. To get out, call Dean, call anyone. But something about that clipboard, about the fact that it had been moved, kept pulling me forward. I crouched and picked it up. The paper clip beneath it hadn't been there before. A second sheet. Cleaner. Less faded. My hand started to shake as I lifted it. Typed text. Newer than the original form. A different heading. Admission update, Room B. Below it, a single line had been added in dark ink. The handwriting wasn't old. It wasn't faded. It looked fresh. Patient responsive. Request's door opened. My throat tightened. Because as I read that line, something on the other side of the door dragged slowly across the metal, right behind where my hand rested. I yanked my hand back so fast I scraped my knuckles on the edge of the clipboard. The sound behind the door didn't stop. It shifted. Not a strike this time. Not a test. A steady, deliberate movement, like something pressed close to the metal and dragged itself along it, feeling the surface from the inside. My brain tried to form words around it. Someone is in there. But that thought didn't hold. Because there was something wrong with the way it moved. Too slow. Too careful. Like it wasn't just trying to get out, it was trying to understand the barrier. I backed away from the door, one step at a time, the clipboard still in my hand. Okay, I said out loud, my voice tight. Okay, I hear you. The movement stopped instantly. That was worse than if it had continued. Silence pressed in so hard it felt physical. Then, a knock. 3 soft taps. Evenly spaced. I felt the hair rise on my arms. That wasn't random. That was an answer. I didn't realize I was shaking until I tried to step backward again and my leg didn't respond right. Dean, I said louder, turning toward the partition. Dean! No response. The hospital beyond the plastic felt impossibly far away. Behind me. Another 3 taps. Same spacing. Waiting. I didn't turn around this time. I just moved. Fast. Out of the room, through the broken wall, hands fumbling at the zipper until it caught and tore open wider than it should have. I stumbled into the corridor and nearly ran into Dean coming around the corner, radio already in his hand. What happened? He snapped. I grabbed his arm harder than I meant to. There's something in there. His expression didn't change, but his body shifted, alert, grounded. You saw someone? I heard it. I swallowed. It knocked back. Leon came up behind him, breathing a little hard. What's going on? Dean held my gaze for a second, measuring. Then he moved. We went back in together, faster this time. The barrier hung partially torn where I'd ripped it open. Dean pushed through without slowing. The room beyond was exactly as we'd left it. Door closed. Hasp in place. Padlock locked. No movement. No sound. Where? Dean asked. The door. He stepped up to it, pressed his ear against the metal again. Leon stood off to the side, eyes scanning the room like he expected something to come at us from the shelves. We waited. Nothing. Dean knocked once. Firm. Controlled. The sound echoed dull and flat through the steel. No answer. He knocked again. Silence. Leon looked at me. You sure? I held up the clipboard. Dean took it, flipped to the second sheet, and his expression finally shifted. Not fear. Not yet. But something closer to it than I'd seen from him before. This wasn't here earlier, he said. No. Leon leaned over his shoulder. That handwriting, that's not old. No, I said again. Dean looked back at the door, then at the padlock. We're not opening this, he said. A beat passed. Then, a single knock came from inside. Soft. Deliberate. Right at ear level where Dean stood. He didn't jump. But he did step back. Slowly. No one spoke. Another knock. Same spot. Same force. Like whoever, or whatever, was on the other side knew exactly where we were standing. Leon whispered. That's not pipes. No, Dean said quietly. The third knock came. Then a fourth. Then nothing. Dean exhaled slowly and keyed his radio. Control, this is Forrester. I need a supervisor and facilities lead down in the old surgical basement. Now. Static. Then a voice. Copy that. What's the issue? He didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the door. Unsecured restricted area, he said finally. Possible occupant. We backed out after that. No one wanted to turn their back on the room, but none of us wanted to stay in it either. Dean pulled the door as tight as it would go again, checked the lock twice, then we sealed the barrier as best we could. We waited in the corridor. Rick arrived first, looking more irritated than concerned until he saw our faces. What the hell is going on? He demanded. Dean handed him the clipboard. Rick read it. Then read it again. That's not funny, he said. No one's laughing, Leon replied. Rick looked at me. You wrote this? No. You're telling me someone got into a sealed room, wrote a note, and locked themselves back in? I'm telling you what I heard. Dean cut in. We all heard it. Rick's eyes flicked to him. You too? Dean nodded once. That landed. More people arrived. Another security guard, a nursing supervisor, eventually someone from administration who looked like he'd been pulled out of bed and hadn't had time to catch up mentally. They talked. Quiet, tight conversations a few feet away from us. Words like liability, documentation, historical records. No one said the obvious thing out loud. Finally, Rick came back over. We're not opening it tonight, he said. We'll get old building records in the morning, bring in infection control, maybe structural. Until then, this area stays sealed. Dean nodded. I'll post someone down here. Rick looked at the door, then away quickly. Good. People started to disperse. Leon clapped a hand on my shoulder. You coming up? In a minute, I said. He hesitated, then nodded. Don't stay alone. I won't. He left. Dean lingered a moment longer. You did the right thing calling it in. I didn't answer. He followed the others. And just like that, the corridor was quiet again. Except for me. And the door. I stood there longer than I should have. Staring at the plastic barrier. At the faint outline of the room beyond. Trying to convince myself that whatever we'd heard had a rational explanation waiting in the daylight. That someone would come down in the morning, open the door, and find something ordinary. Something that made sense. I turned to leave. And then I heard it. Not from the room. From behind me. In the corridor. A voice. Low. Dry. So close it felt like breath against my ear. You left. I spun around. The hallway was empty. Fluorescent lights. Clean floors. No one there. My heart slammed in my chest. I turned back toward the barrier. And saw the plastic shift slightly inward. Like something on the other side had just leaned against it. Then, 3 soft taps. From the other side of the sealed door. I didn't wait for it to happen again. I got out of that corridor and didn't stop until I was back in the main hallway where the night staff moved like nothing in the world had changed. The normal sounds hit me all at once: phones, carts, distant conversations, and for a second it felt unreal, like I'd stepped out of one place into another without any transition. Leon found me by the vending machines. "You look like hell," he said. "I'm done for the night." "Yeah," he nodded. "Me too." We sat there for a while without talking. That's how you process things like that when you don't have language for them, you don't. You just sit. By 5:30 a.m., word had already spread through half the night shift. Not the full story, just fragments. Locked room. Old unit. Something heard. People speculating the way they always do. Some laughed it off. Some didn't. I clocked out at 6 and left before day's shift took over. The sun was coming up over the parking lot, pale and cold. It should have made everything feel normal again. It didn't. I came back that night because I had to. Not out of curiosity. Not because I wanted answers. Because I needed the hours. When I walked in, Leon was already there, leaning against the shop counter with a coffee. "They sealed it," he said before I even asked. "How?" "Plywood over the partition, caution tape, extra lock on the door itself. Dean's been down there half the night." "That it?" He shook his head. "Admin pulled old records. Or tried to. Nothing useful. That room doesn't exist on any current plans. Old stuff's incomplete." Of course it was. I grabbed my tools, trying to focus on anything else. We made it maybe an hour before Dean showed up. "You too," he said, pointing. "Come with me." Leon and I exchanged a look. "Why?" I asked. "Because whatever this is, it involves your area. And I'd rather have people who've already seen it." I didn't argue. We went down together. The corridor felt different immediately. Quieter. Not empty, just held. The plywood barrier was up where the plastic had been, screwed into the frame. Yellow caution tape ran across it in a loose X. Someone had written "Do not enter" in thick marker. Dean unlocked it and pulled one side open just enough for us to slip through. The air inside was colder than the hallway. The door stood at the far end, exactly where we'd left it. Only now there was a second lock. New. Bright metal against the old steel. Rick stood near it, along with a man I didn't recognize, older, thin, wearing a facilities jacket but with the posture of someone who didn't usually do manual work. "That's Halvorsen," Leon muttered. "Old building archives." Halvorsen didn't look at us right away. His attention was fixed on the door. "You're the ones who heard it?" he asked finally. "Yeah," I said. He nodded once, like that confirmed something he already believed. "This room," he said, almost to himself, "wasn't supposed to be found again." Rick crossed his arms. "Then why is it here?" "Because no one removed it," Halvorsen replied. "They built around it." That didn't help. Dean stepped closer. "We've got reports of movement inside. Sound. Possibly a person." Halvorsen looked at him then. "There is no one inside." "You don't know that." "I do." Something in his tone made the room go still. Leon frowned. "Then what's making the noise?" Halvorsen didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a thin folder. Inside were photocopies, old documents, typed and stamped, some handwritten notes layered over them. He handed one to me. The heading matched the clipboard. Lower Isolation Unit, Room B. Below it, a short report. I read it twice before it made sense. Patient admitted postoperative, I said slowly. Unusual cognitive presentation. Reports, auditory displacement. Keep reading, Halvorsen said. Patient insists voice originates from outside containment. I swallowed. What does that mean? It means, Halvorsen said, he believes someone was speaking to him through the door. Leon let out a short breath. That's not unusual. People say things. Not like this, Halvorsen replied. He described it in detail. Said the voice knew things it shouldn't. Said it responded to him. I felt something tighten in my chest. Dean said, What happened to him? Halvorsen hesitated. Then, he was left inside. The words landed heavy. Rick swore under his breath. That's not possible. It was 1959, Halvorsen said. Different standards. Different failures. Left how? I asked. Halvorsen looked at the door. There was confusion during a shift change. Records misfiled. Staff assumed transfer had already happened. He paused. It hadn't. Silence. Leon spoke first. You said he died. Yes. Then what? A knock came from inside the room. Clear. Sharp. All of us froze. Not one person moved. Then, 3 softer taps followed. Even. Deliberate. My stomach dropped. Dean stepped forward. Who's in there? Nothing. Rick whispered. We're opening it. Halvorsen turned sharply. No. We have to. No. Halvorsen repeated, louder now. You do not open that door. Dean ignored him. He unlocked the new padlock, then the old one. His hands were steady. The hasp slid free. Leon looked at me. You ready for this? No, I said. Yeah, he nodded. Me neither. Dean pulled. The door resisted for a second, then opened. The smell hit us first. Stronger than before. Damp. Old. Wrong. Dean stepped in. We followed. The room looked exactly the same. Shelves. Sink. Gurney. Empty. No person. No movement. Rick let out a breath. Jesus! Then Leon said, Wait! He pointed at the wall. The outlines were still there. But something had changed. The largest rectangle, the one at eye level. It wasn't empty anymore. There was something hanging there now. A clipboard. Clean. New. Dean stepped closer and took it down. He read it silently. Then handed it to me. I didn't want to take it. But I did. The heading was typed fresh. No fading. No age. Current status, Room B. Below it, a single line. Printed. Not handwritten. Door opened from outside. Occupant transferred. My chest tightened. Transferred where? Leon asked. No one answered. Because at that exact moment, the door behind us slammed shut. Hard. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Dean spun, grabbed the handle. Except there was no handle. Only the welded plate. From the outside, we heard it. 3 soft taps. Then a voice. Muffled through the steel. Calm. Close. Can you hear me? Every muscle in my body locked. because I knew that voice. It was mine, from the other side of the door. Please, it said, don't leave me in here. No one moved. No one spoke. And then, from somewhere behind us, inside the room, something shifted. Not on the door. Not near it. From the back. Slow. Deliberate. Like whatever had been transferred, was now standing between us and the wall. We never opened that door again. They sealed it properly the next day. Concrete this time. No frame. No hinges. No trace. Officially, that space doesn't exist. The reports were buried. Halvorsen retired 2 months later. Dean transferred out within the year. Leon quit before winter. I stayed. Because I had to. But I don't work nights anymore. And I don't go anywhere near the old surgical wing. Not after what happened the last time I passed that hallway. I was heading upstairs when I heard it again. Not from behind a wall. Not through a door. Right next to me. Soft. Even. 3 taps. Then my voice. Right at my shoulder. Still there?